However, if I bent it as much as it will without snapping, and then I held it there, and then bent it a bit more and held it there, and if I spent hours, maybe even days, where I locked it in place and kept tightening it bit by bit by bit, soon each end would be able to meet without it snapping. Right? That's adaptation. The brain is the same. If you try to force too much change too quickly, your brain fights against that happening to you. So it will resist the change that you are trying to force on it. Whereas if you put change incrementally, little bit by little bit, it will adapt. This applies to so much more than addiction. This applies to trauma, applies to obesity, the things that we believe, behaviors, coping mechanisms, the way we view ourselves. The brain hates change, right? Because this subconscious part of the brain that I've talked about, it has one main priority that God has given it, right? Which is to survive. Now, this part of the brain, parts like the amygdala and the reward center and other parts, hippocampus and all this, right? These parts of the brain, they are not intuitive. They are not thinking parts. That's this frontal lobe part. These parts, they don't see pattern recognition. They don't know, they don't compare things, nothing like that. They literally are a lot more algorithmic. What you put in, they put back out. What you teach it, it teaches back to you. So these parts of the brain, they hate change because their whole point is to keep you alive. And anything that has kept you alive this long, those parts of the brain think are working. And if you try to change it, those parts of the brain, the amygdala in particular, will ring an alarm and you'll get anxiety, you'll get pushback. Because there's this driving force of those parts of the brain saying, whoa, 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 that's kept you alive this long, so let's just keep doing what we're doing. And part of its agenda in keeping you alive is efficiency. To keep you alive in the easiest, most energy efficient way possible. One of the things that we often underestimate is how much the brain is burning literal caloric energy. When your brain is working, it is literally burning calories. It's burning energy. And these parts of your brain, in trying to keep you alive, a big part of that is trying to do so with as little energy as possible. Change burns loads of energy. So your brain, those parts of your brain will say, whoa, 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 using that substance, doing that activity, thinking those things about yourself, talking about yourself that way, having that belief about God, coping with that, harming you, that's all kept us alive this long. Don't mess with it. Right, those parts of the brain, if they had a slogan, it'd be something like, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. The problem is that it don't know what's broke. It just knows you're still alive. So it will do everything it can to keep you in the way that has kept you. It hates change, but it adapts. So it hates being pushed to snapping point, but it's very adaptable with gradual, slow, incremental change, but then it doesn't want to change from whatever it's adapted into. The brain and the body, once they've adapted, whatever they've adapted to, they want to stay that way. And sometimes it's oblivious to the fact that it's adapting because this change is so incremental. But all it knows, like I said, it doesn't do pattern recognition. In fact, those parts of the brain don't even know time, right? That's why when trauma gets trapped in those parts of the brain, that's why your body reacts as if it's happening now, even though it happened 25 years ago. Because those parts of the brain don't know time. They don't know past, present, future. They just know this kept me alive. And they do not want to change from that. So your thinking frontal lobe, in communion with God, reading the Bible, having logic and reason and experience and seeing this isn't a quality of life, can say, I want to change this. But then as soon as you go, right, change, your brain, those parts of your brain go, no, 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 no. So adaptation, the body literally becomes a new normal and tries to stay there. But this keeps on happening our whole lives. We keep on becoming a new normal and trying to stay there. And sometimes that's intentional. That's good when we intentionally start to adapt to a new normal. But usually it's unintentional until we learn this stuff. And so it often spirals down. Now this is where tolerance comes in. So the same with the calorie reducing and all of that. As the brain adapts and the body adapts, we start to increase our tolerance of what we are doing to it. So in this case, with addiction, the poison. You know, reportedly, Rasputin could daily drink a spoon of arsenic because he was so convinced that someone would try to poison him one day that he started giving himself arsenic in such tiny increments. And at first, it made him really ill because it was arsenic, but then he just gradually kept increasing the increments. And when it made him too ill, he gave himself a bit less, and he got it until every day he drank arsenic because he was so convinced someone would try and poison him that he made himself tolerant to the poison. And that's what we literally do when we consume anything addictive. Like I said, with coughing up after a cigarette, or with the first taste of alcohol, unless it's laced with sugar. That's one of the terrible things about alcopops and stuff, is that they interfere, all of that sugar interferes with the body's natural resistance to poison. Because naturally, if anybody woke up one day and just took a sip, you know, if you went to someone who's never drank alcohol in their whole entire life and gave them a sip of whiskey, what would they do? But anything that, upon first trying, all mammals don't like, indicates that it's poisonous. I remember when I did 6 weeks of no sugar, like there was 3 of us in the house that did it, and we were all so looking forward to when we could have sugar again. And I remember we'd gone to London in that 6 weeks, and we'd gone into Harrods, and we'd all bought ourselves like 3 or 4 little chocolates from Harrods, ready for when the 6 weeks was over. And as the end of the 6 weeks was approaching, we were like, oh, we've got those Harrods chocolates. I'd also got a packet of chocolate hobnobs, I'd got like a chocolate orange. I was like, come on. Those Harrods chocolates were disgusting. All of it. It was so sweet. It was like, oh my gosh, because I had readapted back to not having the tolerance for sugar that I had before. So it's the same with any substance. That's, you know, it's like that's why when somebody hasn't used, say, for example, heroin or alcohol for so long, their body has readapted back, so the bent has come back, maybe not in their brain and in their mind, because they didn't do it through true freedom, they did it through willpower, but their body has adapted back, and that's why when they then go use the same amount they would have used before, they overdose. So part of this adaptation is tolerance. When we're living in sparsity, when we need to try things that we don't know if they're safe or not, how incredible that God has designed the body to adapt and become tolerant in case something is our only source. That's so gracious and genius of God. But addictive substances and activities take advantage of that and corrupt it. Another way that the brain adapts, aside from the incremental, is when something drastically alters the environment. That can be like putting a gentle, slow flame under the ruler that makes the plastic even more flexible and moldable and shapeable than it would otherwise be. So this is why sometimes when people go to like boot camps or conferences, or like often they are more likely to experience like some groundbreaking revelation and epiphany, and something changes in their brain. Now often we think that that's just in our mind, that we just thought, oh wow, Jesus actually did that for me. But we know that we've thought that before and it didn't change us, but something changed us. And yes, it's what the Holy Spirit, but it's the Holy Spirit doing something to our body, our brain. And it's when we go into these environments that change our state so drastically that it can make us more malleable to change. So then again, that's like the soldiers. So often, these incremental changes, in the positive, that's intentional, incremental. So for example, I used to be a night owl. I was the most night owl person you could ever meet. I would stay up till 3, 4 in the morning. And it wasn't just that I liked being up at night, I did my best work at night. I was the most creative at night. Like, you know, when I was in uni, one essay I wrote at night would get such better marks than an essay I wrote across 4 whole days. I was definitely fully, innately a night owl. I changed it. Now, that doesn't mean being a night owl is bad, but I had reasons to change it, which maybe I'll talk about another time. But I changed it, and now I'm a total born in lark. Like, Clyde still laughs at the change, because before the alarm goes off, I've woke up, and boom, I jump out of bed. If I'm ill, if I'm anything, the only time I won't do that is maybe if I'm jet lagged. But it was through gradual, little, tiny, intentional, incremental steps of change that slowly... Now, they say that your circadian rhythm is just how you are and you can't change it. Well, I literally changed mine from the extreme of one to the other. Like, we underestimate how much we can change, but that change is through little, intentional, incremental steps that gradually adapt, that our brains and bodies gradually adapt to. When it's adaptation, when it's intentional, that's good, right? But the trick of addiction is a form of adaptation. And it's where addiction, that addictive substance, I don't remember what page it is, but in book 1, you've got the graph of how craving works. Yeah. That is the adaptation of the trick of addiction, where slowly, bit by bit, incrementally, it's changing your brain into something without you being aware of it. Like, who wakes up one day having never had a sip of alcohol, never having had a drag of cigarette, never having gamed, never having watched porn, masturbated, anything like that, who wakes up one day, takes heroin and is suddenly an addict to heroin? It's incremental. It's little bit by little bit. And we can do that in the positive, by intentional choices. Addiction does it in the negative, by tricking us and slowly changing the way that our brains work. The soldiers who returned and just stopped using, they didn't just stop for psychological reasons. They didn't just stop because they had kids that jumped all over them, excited to see them home. They didn't just stop because they enjoyed a job they were returning to. It wasn't just psychological, it was physical, it was neurological. This hadn't bent. It was still a ball. Their whole self, their brain, hadn't adapted to that. And so as soon as they left that environment, the ball was removed because they hadn't adapted to it. So after the war was over, their brains returned to the normal state that the brain still saw it as, this is what kept me alive my whole life. That period was so different to life that my brain could compartmentalize it and see everything in it, the guns, the shooting people, and the drugs, the living in trenches, sleeping on soil, all of it, it kept in a ball as a separate part that was then removed. This is literally what's going on in the brain. The thing is, that adaptation, it involves so many different parts of the brain and the body and who we are. It also involves the psyche, how we think. It involves the spirit. It involves every part of who we are gets in on this. And even when it comes to the brain, whatever that brain's new normal is, it's not like just the reward center with the faulty short-circuited dopamine release has adapted and been broken. All the other parts get in on that too. So the amygdala says, whoa, okay, so being without that is a threat, because it's adapted to that being what keeps you alive. Now, you know with your frontal lobe, that ain't keeping you alive. Even though you will have thoughts like, I can only get through the day if I. So there's part of you that thinks that it has travelled to your frontal lobe where you're intellectualising it. But those parts of your brain, they think that you need that to stay alive. Well, your amygdala gets in on that, which is the emotional fear response, fight or flight. If it's pervasive, whether somebody is so hooked on doom scrolling that they know they're neglecting their children, they know they're not doing their job properly, or whether it's heroin, whether it's crack, whatever it is, the amygdala, you've had that feeling when you think you can't get the thing. The amygdala kicks in and gives you such anxiety. It prepares you for fight or flight because it sees the lack of that thing as a threat to your survival. So your body starts pumping adrenaline, it starts pumping cortisol, you get shaky, you're urgent, you've got to do something, you've got to move, you can't sit still, you're in a panic. It's anxiety, it's physical anxiety because the amygdala has adapted as well. and thinks that being without that thing is a threat to your survival. Even like the hippocampus, your memories will literally adapt to this new normal, and you will remember according to what your brain thinks it now needs to survive, misinformed. Studies have shown we only actually remember things around 50% accurately. And this is hard for us to accept, especially when we've got memories that we've lived our whole life by. But they did a couple of studies. One of them was 9/11 and the other one was some other big world event, I can't remember what it was. And they interviewed a large sample of people on the day of these things, or the next day. And then with the 9/11, they went back to them like 5 years later. With the other world event, it was a bunch of students that they interviewed, and they went back to them twice more. Now, in both cases, right, the memory changed by about 40% the 5 years later. And with the students, when they went back to them again, even later, the memory had changed more than that. But here was the real kicker. When they were given the copy of what they had disclosed and said they remembered immediately after the event, they said, oh, well, I don't know what I was thinking. I don't know why I wrote that. They were so convinced that their now memory was the correct one that they were like, oh, maybe I was in shock. Oh, maybe I was worried about getting into trouble. And they actually justified and came up with reasons for why the first one was false, because they were so convinced that the current one. But memory changes. We do not remember things accurately. And so the hippocampus and other parts of the brain involving memory get in on this adaptation and start to actually alter our memories of what life was and is like with or without those substances, or those self-limiting lies, or the horrible things you say to yourself in your head, or those other bad coping mechanisms and self-sabotage and phobias and things like that. Like your whole brain, apart from even the frontal lobe, like I said, you come up with reasons until you know different, it all gets in on it. And your body, your nervous system, even your cells in your DNA get in on it to adapt and not change unless we readapt. Oh, and pathways. Any of you who've read part 1, you know about pathways. The brain forms all of these pathways that links that to that and that to that and that to that, all confirming falsely that this thing will keep you alive and that you need it. Like anything bad that we are stepping into, if it happens suddenly, if it happens out of context and it's not our normal, it's so much easier to pull back out of it. It's so much easier. That ball, we actually have loads of those balls in our lives. Like different things that are invasive, but they're not pervasive. Different beliefs that we have, different behaviours that we have, different thought patterns and coping mechanisms. And if any one of them stays as a ball and it's not what our new normal is, it can be more easily removed. But if we adapt to it, if we let it happen slowly over time, incrementally, then it becomes pervasive and it becomes our normal. Once we have adapted to something bad, we need to readapt. Not necessarily back, because a lot of us, we don't want to go back to where we were before the addiction. We want to go forward somewhere new. But we need to readapt. You know, muscle is a brilliant example. When I talk about homeostasis, and I said it's not just the brain, and I mentioned like the nervous system and cells, but muscle is another great example. Have you heard of muscle memory? Like if you are trying to build muscle that is weak, it takes so much effort, right? So like here's an example. If you go to Sugar Row, Clyde's gym, I used to go there for a bit, and you look at the people at the beginning of their journey, the only way they will build muscle is if they have this much protein at this time and they put carbs at the back and they carb cycle, and if they, you know, have that then and they have that then and they've got to do that way, they've got to go to breaking point, they've got to da-da-da-da-da. When you look at the coaches who've been doing it for years, like they miss days of exercise. They can go on holiday and eat like pizza every single day and they stay muscular. People at the beginning of the journey, if they did that, they're right back to the beginning again because they're not in homeostasis as muscular yet. And so as you would say, muscle is a brilliant example. Like, once you have built the muscle and that's become your normal, it would take so much time to undo that, because that's now, and your body will send all its resources, it will do everything it can to keep that way. Whereas when you're first beginning, it's sending you nothing. Like, you gotta work for it. As I said about adaptation, the changing of environment is a part of it. The incremental is a part of it. And so, like with muscles, sometimes hitting that wall, sometimes a person will know, an experienced person will know, I tried to change too fast, too much too quick, and I need to pull back again. Others will know, I've hit a plateau, and so I need to change it up. And so there's an intuition to it. And also, this is one of the really cool things, actually. So this ruler, it will snap if I keep bending it. This one, I can bend straight away, because it's been built different on a molecular level. Now, this is so cool. God is so awesome. When we repeatedly, intentionally use the neuroplasticity of our brain and use incremental change and use homeostasis to our advantage and use adaptation to our advantage, and we intentionally change the brain our way, it becomes more and more flexible to keep on changing. And so, I mean, that comes down, there's like a big one is BDNR, which is a molecule that the brain releases, which, by the way, is really released by exercise, but there's other things as well. But that molecule makes the brain more flexible. So the more that you flex it and change it on purpose, and the more flexible it becomes. And so, like, things that for me 7 years ago would have been such a long, careful journey to change, where I would keep, well, I don't know about you guys, but this was my biggest flaw, where I would keep trying to change too much too quick, and I'd have to pull back, and then too much too quick, and I'd have to, and so much trial and error, and so much, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, and it would take ages to bend. Now, that same level of change is like half the effort, takes half the time, because I've spent those years intentionally training my brain and adapting it to adaptation.